the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth.
Tá realmente cena de guerra aqui em Washington nesse dia da posse de Donald Trump.
Not our president! Not our president!
Alô, pessoal, a gente está aqui para um bate-papo com Ian Bremmer. Ian é o CEO e fundador, principal executivo do Grupo Eurásia, Eurasia Group in English. O Grupo Eurásia é a principal consultoria de risco político mundial. Hoje em dia, quando os investidores vão aplicar dinheiro em algum país, eles consultam o Grupo Eurásia para ver qual é o risco que eles estão correndo, o risco político.
You know, the world has economic recessions on average every 7 to 8 years since World War II, and we get used to the boom and bust cycles. But we've not seen a geopolitical recession since 1945. We're in one now. We focused on globalization for decades now. We focused on connectivity for decades now. We focus on the discontents, and we focus on a world order that's starting to come apart without anyone knowing what comes next. From that perspective, 2017 is an unprecedentedly volatile political risk environment.
So let's move to the top risks of 2017 that you just released. You call it the geopolitical recession. Why?
Well, you know, people understand the notion of a recession, right? Economic recessions happen every 7 to 8 years on average since World War II. We even have a technical term. You're in technical recession if your country has negative growth 2 quarters in a row. We know what the boom cycle is. We know the bust cycle. Well, it turns out that geopolitics have boom and bust cycles too. And the last time we had a recession, geopolitically, was World War II. Since then, the United States was in charge of the boom cycle, the Pax Americana. We created the global architecture and institutions and alliances, first all by ourselves, then with the challenge from the Soviets and the Cold War, then they collapsed in 1991, then by ourselves again. But since 1945, there's been a geopolitical boom cycle. But of course, anyone that looks at the history of the world knows that a small country like the United States, given the size of the global population, extremely unusual to have them control the global order for a long period of time. So the end was coming. If Hillary Clinton had been elected president, it would have happened over a longer period of time, more smoothly, and America would have had more of a role in determining what came next. But with the election of Trump, the end of the Pax Americana is now.
We've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own. And spent trillions and trillions of dollars overseas while America's infrastructure has fallen into disrepair and decay. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Cette élection américaine ouvre une période d'incertitude. Ce contexte appelle également à une Europe unie et également capable de s'exprimer et de porter une politique partout où ses intérêts ou ses valeurs sont en cause.
We don't care if you have values that align with ours, but tell me if you can get us a good deal. That independent America is going to weaken trust between major countries around the world. It's going to weaken the architecture and the alliances. It'll fragment global standards. And I hate to say this, but it also makes war more thinkable.
This independent America is part of the global reaction against globalism, right?
Yes.
So what explains that?
Well, I think there are a few things, maybe 3 things that I would focus on. The first is that globalization did not help everybody.
Yeah.
It helped the top 1%, maybe even the top 10%, and then it helped the global middle class. But the middle class.
So many people came out of poverty, right?
Yes. I mean, China. Globalization
Brazil.
is but China's now the world's second largest economy. Came from nothing, right? In 35 years. On average, almost 10% growth. Brazil, India, I mean, the BRICS. This is the story of the emerging global middle class. It's because of globalization. Number two, immigration. Globalization wasn't just about taking your production outside your country, but it's also about talent coming in. And it's not just an economic talent issue, it's also people that look different, people that act different, that have different cultures. And what we see is that in the United States, there are a whole bunch of white men that look around and see the world and America as becoming females matter more, right? Hispanics matter more, and they're growing in number. Asians matter more. Blacks just became the president of the United States. They don't feel comfortable.
The oath of office I take today is an oath of allegiance to all Americans. We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American.
Third point, connectivity. The first billion people that had access to the internet were either wealthy people from the developed world or they were elites in emerging markets. You now have billions of people connected to the internet. Most of them are poor. And those people are not happy with the status quo. And they are more capable, because they have these communication devices, of both getting information on how others live and also using their voice and connecting with others that are like them to expand discontent. Clearly, if the technology that right now is becoming the biggest threat to new jobs, not globalization, it's about automation and artificial intelligence. It's about 3D manufacturing. If those are the things that take away jobs in the next 10 years, not just in the United States, but in Brazil, then anti-globalism is going to grow a lot more in emerging markets too.
O Reino Unido escolheu um destino que desconhece. As empresas avaliam a necessidade de se realocar. Os britânicos questionam o impacto no bolso, no valor da casa, no salário, no emprego.
We should make clear that for the foreseeable future, there is absolutely no change in Britain's trading relationships with the EU or other markets. The legal status of British nationals living or working in Europe will not change, and neither will the status of EU nationals in Britain.
I'm now in a position for the first time in my career where I truly believe that the biggest threats to the global marketplace are not economic, they're political. I've never said that before.
O nome de Trump não foi mencionado uma única vez, mas Xi Jinping aproveitou a oportunidade para criticar os que culpam a globalização pelos principais problemas do mundo e disse que buscar o protecionismo é como se trancar numa sala escura.
经济全球化确实带来了新问题，但我们不能就此把经济全球化一棍子打死。 而是要适应和引导好经济全球化。
If the United States doesn't want to lead, the Chinese will do more. This is a very different China from 10 years ago that was saying, oh, we're small, we're poor, don't pay attention to us. Now they're saying, we want globalization. We want to be in charge of peacekeepers. We're going to support the new United Nations Secretary General. We're going to put more money in. We're going to spend $1 trillion outside our borders on One Belt, One Road, and we're going to do infrastructure. And we want our trade architecture. You've got the Chinese RMB in special drawing rights basket for the IMF now, right? I mean, all of these things are changing. But let's also be clear that Trump, as president-elect, has already said a number of things to China and about China, which are deeply worrying for the Chinese government on Taiwan, on the One China policy, on North Korea, and on their nuclear weapons and what China is and is not doing to help ensure that they do not continue to develop, on Chinese currency manipulation, on IP, on tax, on trade. And the Chinese have already started to hit back with a fine against General Motors, with military activities South China Sea, also outside Taiwan. So I think that Trump is very likely, and we've seen this from his appointments to cabinet, on trade in particular, he's very likely to come out swinging against Beijing.
Let's say China. 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 We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs.
So this is a bad time for Trump to be fooling around on Taiwan or tweeting on North Korea.
North Korea, you say in the report, is going to be a real risk in this year, right?
Yes, and that was before. I said that before Trump decided to start tweeting about them. You know, first of all, Trump, don't tweet, and secondly, if you are going to tweet, don't tweet about North Korea, because the North Koreans are more unpredictable than Trump. He said that the North Koreans will not be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon on a missile that can hit the United States, the mainland U.S., that he's going to stop them.
Well, it won't happen.
How's he going to stop them?
A Coreia do Norte afirma que está em fase final de desenvolvimento de uma arma nuclear capaz de atingir partes dos Estados Unidos. Isso não vai acontecer.
You can see the constellation here. In the last few years of the Obama administration, these were relationships that they weren't easy, but they were reasonably well managed. And Obama had lots of foreign policy problems, but not this one. This is looking like, you know, a real confrontation. And North Korea in the middle of it, the world's only truly remaining totalitarian state. And they've got a lot of cards to play because there are no real constraints on them. You know, what are we going to do to them? I mean, these guys could destroy Seoul, South Korea within 24 hours just using conventional artillery. They don't actually need nukes. So, you know, how much do you want to push them?
You wrote, Europe has never needed a strong Merkel more. In 2017, she'll be unavailable for the role.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that we know that there are crises that hit Europe. They've hit Europe since the 2008 financial crisis. We had the Eurozone crisis, and of course, all of these, you know, economic implosions from Greece to Spain to Portugal. We've got now Brexit, which they have to work through. It's going to take many years. The Italians just lost their referendum. We've got a big French election coming up in 2017. We've got refugees. We've got big terrorist problems. The one thing we've been able to rely on since 2008 is the German chancellor has the strength and willingness to respond, to lead a response with the ECB. 2017, Merkel's much weaker. She's going to win. I mean, no, this would be a disaster.
She's going to be reelected,
It'd be a disaster if she wasn't reelected, right? She will be reelected.
Angela Merkel anunciou que vai tentar mais mandato como primeira-ministra da Alemanha. Seria o quarto dela liderando os alemães. Merkel sofreu uma derrota nas eleições regionais desse ano e os índices de aprovação têm diminuído, mas ela ainda tem apoio político.
So Merkel's going to be weaker. So the ability of the Europeans to respond effectively to the crises that occur, and the ability of Germany to count on a strong relationship with the United States, just not what it was. And so we have to recognize that 2017, the most important alliance in the world, right, the transatlantic alliance since 1945, is a principal casualty of the geopolitical recession.
We don't have time to go into each of the other items, so let's just Pick something that you think is going to be a big risk for 2017 in those other items.
Well, in the Middle East, right, well before you have technology taking away jobs, in the Middle East, technology is what took away the power of oil. The energy revolution means that Saudi Arabia is no longer the swing producer for global oil. It's the United States. That's new technology. In 5 years, suddenly the thing that gave legitimacy to these governments, the ability to take huge money out of the ground and give it to their people, justifying their rule, has just eroded dramatically, and it's going to get worse. In addition to that, you have all of these people in the Middle East that have access to their smartphones. And, you know, they're not, if the United States, if we don't watch, one of the major networks, instead we watch CNN, we watch MSNBC, it's polarized. But most of us don't care. Most of us don't vote, right? Where in the Middle East, if you're not watching Al Jazeera, you're watching Sunni news or Shia news or tribal news, and it's causing a lot of confrontation. And these are governments that need privacy. They need to be able to conduct their affairs quietly. And now you've got the age of WikiLeaks and Panama Papers. What happens if the way the Saudis spend their money and the way they behave and the way they work with the United States and even Israel behind the scenes, what happens if all of that becomes public? These countries are going to fall apart. So I think that it's the driver of technology that really underpins so much of why the Middle East can't be fixed, so much of why terrorism and radicalism is growing across the Middle East, and so much of why it's so hard. Everyone tries to figure out what we can do to fix it, and instead all we do is military attacks against the symptomatic aspects as opposed to the root causes. It shows why this is going to be so hard in 2017.
It's interesting that other predictions for 2017 mention a lot of things that are like expected, like obvious, that you leave aside, like terrorism, Syria, or climate change, or other stuff. Why didn't you go into those items?
Well, I mean, two reasons. First of all, terrorism for me, I mean, ISIS has already lost 25% of their territory in Syria and Iraq. They will probably lose the caliphate this year. Terrorism is going to become a bigger risk nonetheless. But we wanted to understand not the headlines, but what's behind the headlines. We're trying to provide, you know, for people that are going to spend the time to read this report, we want them to understand why the risk environment is growing. Telling them that Syria is going to be bad this year is not useful, right? Understanding that the Middle East is fundamentally unfixable and is reverting to a pre-Westphalian state, that governments are failing because technology is unwinding the place, that's really important. Climate. We didn't mention climate because, frankly, most of the big risks around climate are still longer term. And there's no question, you look at a country like Yemen where there's no more water, this is a climate issue. And you look at the extreme storms and droughts that are coming in sub-Saharan Africa, this is a climate issue. But for the major economies of the world, there still is a belief that you can kick this can down the road. And so I just don't expect that climate itself is going to be driving a lot of global headlines in 2017.
Segundo informações preliminares da Organização Mundial de Meteorologia, a temperatura global aumentou cerca de 1,2 graus Celsius se comparada com os níveis pré-industriais. O número atual está próximo do limite de 1,5 graus estabelecido pelo Acordo do Clima de Paris, assinado no ano passado. Uma das razões para a temperatura atingir esse nível foi a ação do fenômeno El Niño.
Long term, that's one where clearly the unwillingness of major governments to suitably address this issue is going to bite us in the ass.
Let's talk about Brazil. So how do you see Brazil in this geopolitical recession scenario?
Well, you know, this is a year where we're seeing so little reform in emerging markets all over the world. And in many places, that's because the leaders don't have the political capital to actually push long term. Now, in Brazil, that's also true. Not much political capital for the acting president who just came in on the back of the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. But it's precisely the fact that the Lava Jato probe continues to take place, and that there's an enormous pressure, not only on the acting president, but also on members in Congress of corruption and of concerns that maybe they'll be pushed out too. They don't want that. And they understand they need to get things done that keep the Brazilian economy humming along. And so we think that actually, because of the weakness in 2017, pension reform, very unpopular pension reform, actually gets done. And that's a clear market positive for Brazil.
Se o texto for aprovado, a economia prevista é de 680 bilhões de reais em 10 anos. Para o governo, a importância da reforma não é apenas para o ajuste fiscal, mas para a manutenção do próprio sistema.
Eu não vejo a não reforma como uma opção. A alternativa não reforma é ocorrer o que aparece hoje em vários estados. E você não conseguir pagar.
So oddly speaking, 2017, despite all of the problems, looks better. And certainly after the elections coming up, we think Brazil is going to be on a better trajectory.
So you're long on Brazil?
We're long on Brazil at this point. We really are. Yeah, look, I mean, it's the first office that we opened in an emerging market. And, you know, we didn't do that because we just want to be friendly. I mean, look, everyone should want an office in Brazil because it's so much fun to be there. But we made the decision because we believe in the market long term. If you look at the BRICS, the reality is that Brazil is by far the most developed. Brazil's the one that really has rule of law. Brazil's the one that has a business community, business class, and a financial class that is most advanced, most capable of working globally. I mean, China's a much more exciting market. China also has much more volatility, no rule of law. Russia as a market is smaller than Canada, but they happen to have a bunch of nuclear weapons. Not a great market, right? And India is just taking too long. Even though the trajectory for India is great, it's from a very, very low base. So I think there are really good reasons to believe in Brazil long term.
One final question. Even though the outlook for 2017 looks so negative, you're still an optimist. What reasons for optimism do you see?
Well, number one, because I exist, right? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we do have to remember that this is an extraordinary gift. We have no idea why we're here, and it's incredibly important to take advantage of that and be productive. You know, it's just I'm existentially optimistic. I'm not a glass is half full. I'm like, wow, there's a glass. That's extraordinary. You know, that's kind of my view on life. I grew up in the projects. You know, I mean, I am the American dream, and I'm highly aware of the fact that a lot of Americans today no longer feel that they have those opportunities, and so it really is incumbent on me and on the firm Eurasia Group to do what we can in an environment where the work we do is more important, is more relevant, and makes a difference to try to help. But beyond that, I do think we need to understand and recognize in the last 20 years, we have taken 1 billion people out of poverty on this planet. And that is the most extraordinary accomplishment that humanity has ever made in our short time on this planet. So the tools that we have to make a difference are simply unprecedented. And even though 2017 is going to be a very hard year, and we may slip back, and a lot of people may do a lot worse than they were doing, we do need to recognize that it is precisely the individuals that matter. And in a G0 world, where governments are doing less, individuals are going to do more. It's going to be the Bill Gateses, the Mike Bloombergs, Pope Francis. I mean, these are people that are going to step up to the challenge because human beings respond to adversity. And if you can add to that list Ian Bremmer and Eurasia Group in even a small way, then I'm going to be very happy that what we accomplished in 2017 was worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
And unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth.
Tá realmente cena de guerra aqui em Washington nesse dia da posse de Donald Trump.
Not our president! Not our president!
Thank you.